مشاهدينا مرحبا بكم في حوارات السياق. حذر الأمين العام لمنظمة الأمم المتحدة أنطونيو غوتيريش من كارثة إنسانية تهدد السودان مع تواصل القتال هناك لليوم 11 على التوالي. للمزيد من المتابعة حول هذا الملف ينضم إلينا توماس ماونتن المؤرخ والصحفي المتخصص في القرن الإفريقي. أستاذ توماس مرحبا بك معنا.
You're welcome.
إلى ماذا تشير آخر التقارير على الأرض في السودان؟
Well, the latest reports show that the General Hameti's rapid support forces, the militia, have pretty much taken over all of Sudan and control almost all of Khartoum. The only heavy fighting that my reports say is going on is around the presidential palace. So, the Sudanese army, which is a very large, well-armed army of about 250,000 with aircraft and heavy artillery and tanks and everything else, it's pretty much collapsed according to all these reports. And that this a lightly armed militia of about 100,000, led by General Hameti, is pretty much taken over Sudan in about 12 days of fighting. The Sudan airport's been captured quite a while now. And unfortunately, the major problem with violence is that the Sudanese Air Force is continuing to bomb civilian areas, that the Sudanese Doctors Union announced today that 16 hospitals have been bombed by, has to be by the Sudanese Air Force because they're the only Air Force in the country. So this is big war crimes going on and the world is silent. And it's only a few places, outlets like yours, that's addressing this huge war crime that's happening. I mean, the bombing civilians and hospitals, 16, and where's the outrage? Where's the Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International and the Western countries and the media? How come they're not screaming about war crimes being committed against civilians by the Sudanese army? Well, because the CIA is backing this coup. So, I mean, the best example of how the US is supporting Burhan is the fact that the senior US diplomat in Africa, Negi, the Assistant Secretary of State for Africa for the US State Department, posted a vicious attack on Hemeti last week on Twitter. So, and they haven't said a thing about the Sudanese Air Force bombing hospitals and civilians.
أنت تخبرني أن الولايات المتحدة هي من دفعت بقرارات البرهان الأخيرة، لكن علاقة الجنرالين بدأت في تدهور منذ أشهر.
General Hemeti has a very clear track record of supporting return to civilian rule. I mean, the first civilian government that came to power after the overthrow of 30-year dictator General Bashir, President Bashir in Sudan, was orchestrated by, basically directed by Hemeti. He went to Asmara, Eritrea, and the saying out here is all roads to peace in the Horn of Africa run through Asmara, Eritrea. And when he returned home from Eritrea, he announced the settlement of basically a peace deal, in Sudan. So he brought peace to Sudan, and then General Burhan overthrew the civilian government and established himself as the supreme ruler of Sudan. And so Hemeti's got a track record of working with Eritrea to bring peace to Sudan. Burhan's got a track record of carrying out coups, supporting reactionary forces in neighboring countries. And, and the fact that the US, the US basically is between a rock and a hard place in the Horn of Africa. The Horn of Africa is a strategically critical part of the world, with most of the trade between Europe and Asia passing through the Red Sea. Now, the Bab al-Mandeb, the Gate of Tears between the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, is bordered by Yemen and Eritrea, with Djibouti to the south. Now, the Arab world is turning their back on the US. Saudi and UAE is recognizing Iran and starting to trade with Iran, much to the dismay of the United States. Last year, the US lost Ethiopia pretty much. They're no longer, they're policemen on the beat in the Horn of Africa. And pretty much the only US major control or influence in the Horn of Africa is in Sudan through General Burhan. General Hemeti has finally realized that Burhan was attempting to eliminate him. Burhan basically announced, I think at the CIA's request, that they were going to absorb Hemeti's militia into the military, meaning they were going to wipe out Hameti. Now, you got to understand, Hameti went to Russia, and when he returned, after an extended stay, Burhan, shortly after return, General Burhan has a press conference, announces a naval base on the Red Sea. Now, this really upset the CIA, and they knew that this was Hameti's doing. So, they decided that Hameti has to go. So they basically told Burhan, get rid of him, eliminate him through absorbing his armed forces into the military. And Hameti knows what's going to happen if that happens. So Hameti basically had the RSF move up into strategic positions, and the war broke out.
ماذا عن علاقة حميتي بفاغنر؟ هل تم تضخيمها إعلامياً؟
Well, the Wall Street Journal report came out about the Egyptians arming Burhan's army, military. And then that story was killed, and not a mention of it anywhere. And instead, CNN broadcast, actually, the Wagner group under Russia is sending surface-to-air missiles to Sudan. And their sources are the Sudanese army and Western diplomats. Okay, and they won't even name who their sources are. So that story's got a lot of holes in it. It's hard to believe. I mean, it's easy to believe that Sudan would be sending military because Sudan doesn't want Hameti in power. I mean, Egypt doesn't want Hameti in power. So, there's a lot of things behind the scenes going on.
كيف تفهم التطورات الأخيرة عن فرار رموز نظام البشير من السجن؟
Bashir's supporters had joined with Burhan, because Burhan and Bashir were close until Burhan helped overthrow Bashir. And in desperation, Burhan has gone to Bashir's supporters, who are still very numerous and powerful, and asked them to support him. And many of them are in the military, which explains why there's apparently a split in the General Burhan's forces, where one side of their coalition is saying, we have to have peace talks and ceasefire. And yet the Sudanese Air Force and Army has not implemented the ceasefire. They're continuing to shell with heavy artillery civilian areas. They're continuing to bomb civilian areas. So, and former President Bashir's people are still high-ranking in the military. So, another interesting story broke yesterday, how basically the RSF forces under Hameti have seized the WHO, World Health Organization's biohazard laboratories in Sudan, which contain polio and cholera isolates. Now, why is the WHO, which is headed by Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, having a biohazard lab in Sudan? Now, Tedros is a former high-ranking member of the Tigray People's Liberation Front, and Tedros supported the attempted coup against the Ethiopian government from 2020 to 2022. So Tedros, the United States, is the main funder of the WHO and gets to choose who heads the WHO.
هل ما زال ممكنا جر دول الجوار إلى الصراع؟ أتحدث عن مصر، إثيوبيا، ليبيا، إريتريا.
Well, Ethiopia's got its own problems, and they're just happy to see the end of Burhan because he supported the TPLF. Eritrea is not saying anything because in the past, Eritrea has had to play the role of mediator in Sudan and other places. I mean, way back in 1990, the Eritrean People's Liberation Front brought the South and North Sudan together to hammer out a peace deal that lasted a long time. So, I mean, Eritrea's got a history of being the mediator in these conflicts, and they're not saying anything because they're keeping the door open to mediate a solution. Now, Egypt is apparently already intervened. We don't know to what extent, but the Wall Street Journal reported that Egypt is supplying weapons to Burhan's military. So, Egypt's got the most at stake. I mean, historically, Sudan, under the British, Sudan was a colony of Egypt. And Egyptian businessmen play a major role in the Sudanese economy. And Sudan is a major trading partner with Egypt. I mean, Egypt is going to be in a bad spot because, economically, Egypt's in a tough spot right now. I mean, the IMF has just been wringing blood out of the Egyptian people. And, price of bread and sugar and other necessities are just keep skyrocketing. Inflation's out of control. And, a lot of the signs in Egypt point to another explosion similar to the Arab Spring that brought down Mubarak in 2011. So I don't think the Egyptian military, I mean, whether they're going to intervene militarily more in Sudan is hard to say. But I think the biggest threat is Egypt.
هل هناك أي قوى عالمية وإقليمية بإمكانها الضغط على الجنرالين لجلبهما لطاولة المفاوضات؟
Well, but see, the reality is, I think the war is pretty much over. I mean, Burhan's forces have lost. I mean, other than their Air Force bombing, they're on the ground. They really aren't a presence anywhere except around the presidential palace, where the only place that's got serious fighting going on, all the reports say, is around the presidential palace. So I think, Hameti said, we're not going to finish this till Burhan is no longer a threat to Sudan, to civilian rule in Sudan. So they're going to have to capture and imprison Burhan like they did to Bashir. So, I don't see big powers getting involved too much other than basically to pressure Hameti, like the US has been pressuring Ethiopia. And but I've got family and Eritreans in Sudan, and everybody's breathing a sigh of relief now that looks like the fighting is starting to wind down. I mean, so we say, inshallah, there's going to be peace in Sudan soon.
نأمل حقيقة في ذلك، لكن اعذرني، أنت تعطيني صورة وردية عن حميتي بأنه يفعل كل هذا لإزاحة البرهان وإعادة المسار الديمقراطي للبلاد؟
Well, Hameti is no angel, and I've never ever said that. I mean, Hameti's got his own, closets with skeletons in them, but Hameti does have a documented track record of helping restore, playing a principal role in restoring civilian rule to Sudan. And this is what Hameti was in Eritrea last month. He goes to Eritrea to work out a deal for restoring civilian rule and comes back and finds out that the CIA has told Burhan to eliminate him. So, basically, why did he go to Eritrea? He went there to talk about restoring civilian rule like he'd done before. So, like I say, Hameti's no angel, and we can't say where Sudan's going to head with Hameti basically in military control of the country. But we can hope for the best because he has brought civilian rule back to power, and civilian rule is the only way you're going to establish peace in Sudan, based upon consensus and negotiations rather than decree and decree after decree by a military dictatorship. So, we hope that Hameti will honor his commitments and will help reestablish civilian rule in Sudan, and the Sudanese people who've really never seen a war like this. Bombs and artillery being fired into Khartoum. This is a complete shock, not only to the Sudanese people, but to all their neighbors. We've never seen something like this. So how it is that the Sudanese military is firing into their capital? Hey, if they can, the sooner that's over, everybody's gonna, hope breathe a sigh of relief.
هناك سيناريو آخر، ماذا لو تراجع تقدم حميتي واضطر للانسحاب إلى دارفور؟ هل نحن في مواجهة سيناريو تقسيم السودان من جديد؟
That's a nightmare scenario, but as all indications at this point is that the Sudanese army has collapsed and that Hameti has won, and it's just a mop-up operation. There's still pockets of resistance. There's still a lot of hardcore Bashir supporters, hardcore Burhan supporters are going to continue trying to destabilize the country. Certainly Egypt and the US, the CIA will continue to try to destabilize Sudan to try to keep Hameti from consolidating power and returning power to civilian government. So all of these are, questions that are difficult to answer at this point, but, I don't see Sudan splitting. I've spent the last 40 years as a student and a teacher of Horn of Africa. And I lived in Eritrea from 2006 to 2021. And, we've got a lot of Eritrean contacts, family and friends in Sudan that have been, when they can reach us or we can reach them, they've been updating us on what's going on. These are reliable sources. These aren't just some fly-by-night internet people we've known for a long time and whose reports have checked out in the past. So they're all saying, as well as more and more in the West, that the fighting is winding down and Hameti is winning. So hopefully we'll be seeing peace in Sudan soon, I hope, inshallah.
تعتقد أن ذلك سيحدث من خلال المفاوضات؟
Well, Hameti has said that he doesn't agree with this. He is not, he said, okay, negotiations, but on the other hand, he's saying Burhan has to go. and I'm not going to be content until we got him locked up. So, you know, of course, negotiations between the remnants of the Burhan regime and Hemeti are a good thing. And, you know, Eritrea is keeping the door open to mediate that. But, you know, as far as the fighting goes, I don't see Burhan, you know, regaining it unless there's a major Egyptian intervention, and even that will backfire.
أستاذ توماس ماونتن، شكرا جزيلا لك للمشاركة معنا في حوارات السياق.
اوكي، تشاو.
مشاهدينا شكرا على طيب المتابعة، إلى الملتقى.